Hi, you're on the Reddit Confessions channel, and this story might be the one you never forget. The clink of her fork on porcelain is the only thing I remember clearly. That, and the sound of her father trying to stifle a laugh after she said it. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look nervous. She said it like she'd been waiting for years. Well, at least I won't have to keep faking love after this week. No one at the table reacted. No gasps. No shocked faces. Just a few awkward glances and a light chuckle from her sister, who immediately reached for more wine. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My ears buzzed, my throat clenched, and the world tilted slightly to the left, like my body was trying to protect me from understanding what I'd just heard. Her hand rested near mine on the table, calm, still. As if nothing had changed. As if everything wasn't suddenly crumbling beneath the tablecloth. I watched her cut another bite of her salmon. Perfect posture. Perfect control. The candle in front of her flickered once and stayed strong. But I wasn't strong. I felt something unravel inside me. Not violently. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a thread being pulled from a sweater in the dark. What was I supposed to say? Ask her if she meant it? Argue in front of her entire family? Cry? I looked around. No one met my eyes. They weren't surprised. That was the worst part. Not a single face around me looked shocked by her words. I was the only one at that table who didn't know. I wiped my mouth. Placed my napkin down. And I stood up. Someone, maybe her uncle, mumbled something about dessert. Her mother asked if I was okay. I nodded. And I left. No bag. No goodbye. No keys. I walked out of that house and kept walking until I hit the sidewalk under streetlights that buzzed louder than anyone in that room dared to speak. She didn't follow me. No texts. No calls. Not that night. But the next day. Oh, she called. And that's when I learned just how long they'd all been in on it. I spent that first night in a roadside motel an hour from her parents' place, staring at the popcorn ceiling and trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood. I replayed it again and again. Her tone. Her face. The lack of shock on everyone else's. That sentence echoed louder than the traffic outside my window. At least I won't have to keep faking love after this week. She said it like she was commenting on the weather. I kept hoping it was a joke. That maybe she was venting or being sarcastic and I just missed the cue. But deep down, I knew better. That wasn't frustration. That was relief. And not the kind you get from ending a bad day, the kind you get from finally getting away with something. When her name lit up my phone the next morning, I didn't answer. I let it ring until it stopped. Then it started again. Over and over. I counted 9 missed calls before I finally gave in and picked up. "You're being dramatic," she said instantly, before I could speak. No apology. No explanation. Just pure, rehearsed irritation in her voice. "You left during dinner. In front of my family. Are you serious right now?" That's when it hit me, she wasn't surprised that I left. She was surprised I left without giving her a chance to spin it. That phone call wasn't about concern. It was about control. She needed me to come back so she could rewrite the narrative before I made sense of it myself. I asked her one question. Just one. "What did you mean by what you said?" Silence. Then, a shallow sigh. And then she said something that made my skin crawl. "You weren't supposed to hear that part." That part. Like it was a rehearsal. Like I walked in on a stage performance I wasn't invited to. I hung up. She texted. Dozens of them. Some pleading, some angry, some blaming me for making this worse than it needed to be. I didn't respond to any. I just scrolled and scrolled until one message made my heart drop. you're being ridiculous. You knew this wasn't working. We had an understanding. No. We didn't. Not unless she had one with someone else. So I started digging. Through old emails, shared files, photos, anything that might tell me what she'd really been doing while pretending to be my wife. What I found wasn't proof at first. Just shadows. But they were enough. Password reset emails for accounts I didn't know she had. Dinner reservations in her name for 2 at places I've never been. Ride receipts at odd hours. One day, while scrolling through our shared photo cloud, I found something that made my heart pound, a photo of her in a blue dress I didn't recognize, at a rooftop bar, holding a wine glass. She was smiling. Not fake smiling like she did with me. It was the kind of smile you give someone when you feel free. The photo wasn't the problem. It was the reflection in the window behind her, the blurry figure of a man. He was sitting close. Leaning in. And just like that, I realized something I had never been ready to admit before: my wife had been preparing to leave me long before I ever walked away. Only, she never thought I'd do it first. For days, I kept telling myself I was overreacting. That maybe it was all just a strange miscommunication. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more things stopped making sense. Talisa never once tried to come see me. Never asked where I was staying. Never reached out to anyone in my family to find me. She just kept texting like we were negotiating a business split. The messages weren't romantic. They weren't emotional. They were clinical. Cold. When are you planning to pick up your stuff? Should I cancel the joint therapy sessions? If you're leaving the marriage, please clarify in writing. Who asks their spouse to clarify an emotional breakdown in writing? And that's when I knew something much bigger was happening. Something that had been set in motion long before that dinner. I just didn't know how deep it went. Not yet. I went back to our house when I knew she'd be gone, midday on a Thursday. I still had a key. The air inside felt wrong. Like the energy had shifted. Like I was stepping into a life that didn't belong to me anymore. Some of my clothes were missing. My shaving kit. Even the photo of us from our honeymoon, the one we kept in the hallway, was gone. I walked through each room, not knowing what I was looking for, until I ended up in her home office. That room was off limits to me for years. She said it was where she kept her head on straight. I always respected her boundaries. Trusted her. Foolishly. There was a drawer that didn't quite close. Inside, I found a planner, leather-bound, zipped shut. I opened it and my hands started sweating instantly. There were names. Times. Hotel addresses. Most were vague, initials only, but a few were fully written out. And one of them, circled in red ink, was the same rooftop bar from that photo. Next to it, written in Talisa's careful handwriting, was a phrase that still makes my skin crawl: final dry run before confession dinner. Confession dinner. Was that what the dinner had been? A trial run for her to accidentally say something devastating in front of her family? Was I a prop? I couldn't breathe. I sat down on the edge of our bed, no, her bed now, and stared at the ceiling. I couldn't stop shaking. That's when the door opened. I froze. She wasn't supposed to be there. Talisa walked in wearing a navy blazer and holding a coffee cup. She didn't scream. Didn't panic. She just stood in the doorway and looked at me like I was a stranger. Like I had trespassed. So you let yourself in, she said quietly. I figured you would. I couldn't speak. My voice was stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. Then she said something that made every hair on my body stand up. I was hoping you wouldn't wake up so soon. My heart dropped. What does that mean? She smiled, but not kindly. Emotionally. Wake up emotionally. I thought you'd stay numb just a little longer. It would have made all of this easier. That's when I realized, she never planned for a fight. She planned for a quiet, mutual fading. For me to go along with whatever script she had written. For me to accept the narrative without questioning it. But now, by waking up, I had ruined her plan. She didn't try to stop me when I walked past her. She didn't ask for the planner. She didn't cry or shout or beg. She just stood there, smiling, and whispered behind me as I reached the door, "You really shouldn't have come back." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car at a gas station parking lot for over 5 hours, staring at the steering wheel, trying to replay every conversation I'd ever had with her. Every kiss. Every argument. Every time I thought we were healing. Were all of them rehearsed? Or worse, recorded? That thought didn't come from nowhere. Because after I left the house, after she whispered that twisted farewell, "You really shouldn't have come back," something kept nagging at me. That planner. The detailed entries. The phrase, confession dinner. It was all too specific. Too polished. Too strategic. So I went back to the hotel and made one of the hardest phone calls of my life. I called Russ. Russ was her ex. Yeah, I know, you're probably thinking I lost it. But I remembered something from years ago. At a random barbecue, maybe year 2 of our marriage, Russ had one too many beers and mumbled to me, "If she ever starts looking at you sideways, man, get out before she makes you a storyline." I laughed at the time. I thought he was just being bitter. But now, I wasn't so sure. He answered after 3 rings. His voice was rough, like he'd just woken up or maybe hadn't slept in days. I told him I wasn't calling to fight. That I needed the truth. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She's still doing that thing where she turns life into a performance." I didn't understand what he meant. He went on. "She used to run these little experiments on me. Push emotional buttons, watch how I'd react, then write about it. Blogged under a fake name for a while. I only found out because someone at work recognized a story about our breakup, word for word. I felt sick." Russ continued, "She's got this obsession with control. But not just in the real world. In narrative. She has to be the one writing how everything plays out. Even pain. Especially pain." That's when it clicked. The dinner wasn't for me. It wasn't even for her family. It was for whoever was watching. I dug through my emails and searched the phrase, "Talisa writes." Nothing. Then I tried Ren Journal. That was a pen name I remembered hearing once when she spoke at a literary retreat. It was a long shot. But I found it. A blog. Password protected. I clicked the archive link out of curiosity, and to my horror, the post titles were all time-stamped with dates that aligned with the worst moments of our marriage. One was literally titled, "The Night I Let Him Think He Was Winning." Another, "What Happens When You Starve a Man of Intimacy and Watch Him Shrink." I couldn't access the full posts. But that was enough. She was documenting me. Documenting us. Like I was a subject. Like our marriage was a case study in manipulation. And then I saw it, a scheduled post. The title? "Goodbye, Emery. Set to go live in 2 days." I sat there staring at the screen, numb and shaking. That post wasn't written after I left. It was scheduled before. She knew I'd break. She planned for it. And she made sure to write my ending before I even understood what story I was in. It was just past midnight when I finally admitted it to myself, I was never the husband. Not really. I was never the partner. The teammate. The future. I was the rehearsal. The rough draft she needed to test how far she could push someone before they broke. The scheduled blog post proved it. She had pre-written my exit like it was the final scene of a play she couldn't wait to wrap up. And then something even worse occurred to me: what if I wasn't the first? I didn't sleep that night. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept scrolling through old memories like they could rewrite themselves if I just stared hard enough. But they didn't. Everything now felt like a lie told in 1,000 subtle ways: smiles that didn't reach her eyes, apologies that came too fast, moments she forgot, but I never did. By morning, I had a plan. I needed to know how deep it went. Not for revenge. Not even for closure. Just to understand what had happened to me. Who I had been married to. And whether any of it had been real. I contacted a friend from college, Mel, a cybersecurity analyst. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I told her a version of the truth, stripped of drama, made clinical, she agreed to help. She said she'd try to access the full contents of the password-protected blog, if only to help me find peace. While she worked, I did something I never imagined I would do. I reached out to Talissa's former roommate from grad school, a woman named Jenna. We'd met briefly once, years ago. She was the only person Talisa ever stopped speaking to without explanation. I always assumed it was just one of those drifting apart things. But now, nothing about Talisa could be trusted at face value. Jenna agreed to meet me at a quiet coffee shop on the west side. She looked older than I remembered, but her eyes still had that cautious intelligence. When I explained everything, carefully, without sounding unstable, she didn't blink. Instead, she leaned forward and said, "You were lucky it was just a dinner table." I didn't understand. She went on to explain that Talisa had a pattern. She liked to build up someone's sense of control, love, and identity, and then slowly erode it. Not for power. For content. She told me once that she couldn't write unless she watched something fall apart. She needed it to be personal. Intimate. Messy. Jenna said their friendship ended when Talisa published a short story, under a pseudonym, about a roommate who suffered a mental breakdown. "It was me," Jenna whispered. Every word. Even the night I tried to call for help, she turned that into a plot twist. I felt sick again. Like the world kept pulling the floor out from under me, piece by piece. Before we left, Jenna said something that still echoes in my head: Talisa doesn't burn bridges. She watches them collapse and writes about the sound. When I got back to the hotel, Mel had messaged me. She cracked the archive. She'd sent over the extracted posts in a zip file. I couldn't open it right away. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. When I finally did, the first post that popped up was dated nearly a year before the dinner. Its title was simple: How to Train a Man to Walk Away on Cue. And the subject? Me. Not even masked. Not anonymized. My name was in the first paragraph. My habits. My fears. My deepest insecurities, laid out like footnotes to her experiment. And there, at the very end of the post, was the final line. "If this works, the next one will be easier. This is just the blueprint." I didn't eat. I didn't shower. I sat in the hotel room with the glow of my laptop on my face, reading post after post, each one written like a clinical dissection of my identity. She wrote about the way I'd shrink when she dismissed me in public, how I'd second-guess myself for days if she went cold for no reason. She catalogued my triggers like they were ingredients in a recipe. One entry was titled 12 Steps to Make Him Apologize for Your Mistakes. It was dated 2 weeks after the time I took the blame for her forgetting our anniversary. I'd cried. She'd stayed silent. I remembered thinking I was being emotionally mature. Turns out, I was just performing on cue. But it was the comments that finally shattered something in me. Yes, comments. Some of the posts were password protected from the public, but others were not. She had an audience. A quiet, curated one. People who followed her stories like they were fictional dramas. Only they weren't fiction. They were my life. My breakdowns. My humiliation. One comment read, "You're brilliant. He sounds like a perfect soft shell for this phase." Another, "Ugh, men like that deserve it. Drag it out longer next time." And the worst one? "Can't wait to see how you end it. Please let the next one catch on faster, makes the unraveling way more entertaining." The next one. There it was again. The implication that I wasn't the beginning, and definitely not the end. I couldn't stop myself. I went deeper. I searched usernames, traced linked accounts, even used one of those shady archive websites to track deleted posts. That's when I found something that confirmed what I feared, a now-defunct page under the same alias, T. Ren Journal, with a completely different set of entries. Older. Rougher. Less polished. And the subject wasn't me. His name was Milo. And based on the entries, he came before me. His story read like mine, only his collapse had been messier. He confronted her. Threatened to expose her. Tried to warn others. But then the entries stopped. Abruptly. No closure. No final post. I searched for him online. Socials dead. LinkedIn blank. I even looked through old mutual tags and photos. Nothing recent. The last digital trace of him was from 4 years ago. And that's when it hit me. What if the reason Talisa always seemed calm, even in chaos, was because she had already seen the ending? Not just with me. With others. Like she was writing the same story, over and over again, until she perfected it. Until it was clean. Undeniable. Until she could walk away without lifting a finger, and let the man do it for her. I tried to message someone, anyone, from her comment section. Just to see if they knew. If they thought it was real. If they were part of something darker. But every account bounced back. Deleted. Wiped. Then, just as I was about to shut it all down, an email popped up. No sender name. Just a subject line. "You're not the first to look. But you might be the last." Inside was a single sentence. Milo tried to fight the ending. That's why no one hears him anymore. I stared at the screen for over an hour, every part of me frozen except the heartbeat in my ears. Because I wasn't just reading a story anymore. I was inside it. I didn't open the curtains for 3 days. The outside world felt irrelevant, like it belonged to people who still believed in reality. I wasn't one of them anymore. I existed somewhere else now, a place where you could be rewritten while still breathing, erased while still blinking, replaced while still screaming. The email haunted me. Milo tried to fight the ending. It wasn't just a warning. It was a conclusion. I kept asking myself, was that my next chapter? To disappear? Or worse, to become some tragic postscript in her next masterpiece? On the 4th day, I checked our shared bank account. Empty. Not low, empty. She had drained it down to the final cent, even removing the small emergency fund we'd both sworn never to touch. When I called the bank, the manager confirmed she'd closed the joint savings too, with documents signed 3 days before the dinner. Before I even knew anything was wrong. She had planned for me to vanish. But then came the final cut. I got a call from my employer. I hadn't shown up in over a week, which, honestly, I expected. But it wasn't just about my absence. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint accusing me of misconduct. It wasn't true. It wasn't even close to anything I'd ever done. But the timing? Perfect. The day after I left the house. The day after I saw her planner. I knew it was her. It had her fingerprints all over it, precise, premeditated, and timed for maximum instability. But when I mentioned her name, my boss grew quiet. He said, "This came through an agency email, not a personal one. It's being reviewed." She hadn't just wanted me gone. She wanted me discredited. Disoriented. She wanted me to break myself so she never had to get her hands dirty. I called Mel, the cybersecurity friend, and told her everything. She didn't sound surprised anymore, just nervous. She warned me to be careful. That some people aren't just manipulative, they're practiced. Rehearsed. Surgical. She said, Talisa doesn't make mistakes. If she's moving pieces, it's because she already knows the outcome. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't the ending she wrote for me. Not yet. Because I hadn't broken down. I hadn't lashed out. I hadn't done the one thing that would make her narrative airtight. She was still waiting for that. Waiting for me to snap. To scream in public. To send a threatening message. To show up at her work. Something. Anything. So she could finally pull the curtain and reveal the monster she'd carefully painted me to be all along. I realized that's what she had done to Milo. That's what he had fought. And maybe that's why no one hears him anymore. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror that night, searching for the version of myself I used to recognize. He wasn't there. He had been reduced, one scene at a time, by someone who never loved him, only studied him. I pressed my palms against the glass and whispered something I didn't even understand, "You can't kill what doesn't respond." And that was the moment I knew. If she wanted a final chapter, I wasn't going to give it to her. Not in the way she expected. But before I disappeared completely, there was one thing I needed to do, not for her, not for revenge, but for every man before me who never got to tell his story. And that's exactly what I was about to start writing. I didn't go back to the house. I didn't try to reclaim the money. I didn't even respond when she sent a final email titled, "Closure is a gift." Inside, she wrote 3 paragraphs, not to apologize, but to tie a bow on her version of our story. She thanked me for being part of her evolution, and signed it like a note to a hotel guest, warmly, Talisa. For a few minutes, I stared at it. And then, without rage, without heartbreak, I hit delete. Not because I was over it. Not because I'd healed. But because I realized something that finally made the weight lift off my chest: she had never truly written my story. She'd written a version. One that served her narrative. One that was designed to erase my side of everything. But I still existed. My memories, my feelings, my decisions, they were mine, and they weren't going to vanish just because she framed me into silence. So I did something I never imagined I'd have the strength to do. I started writing. Not to expose her. Not to destroy her. But to rebuild me. The real me. The one who learned to recognize manipulation not by textbooks or podcasts, but by surviving it. I moved out of state. Found a quiet place in Vermont. Got a job restoring furniture again. Something about sanding down something old and giving it purpose again, it made sense in a way nothing else did. I found a local community that didn't know my history. I wasn't someone's story. I was just Emery, the guy who brought broken things back to life. And for the first time in what felt like years, I looked in the mirror and didn't flinch. I was still standing. Not as a victim. Not as a character. But as the author. And that, in the end, was the only power she never expected me to claim. Thanks for listening to this story on Reddit Confessions. If you've ever experienced a moment in life where just one sentence changed everything, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to remember, no one else gets to write your ending but you.